All right, friends and family, what's going on? We're jumping right into the video today. I'm going to take you through some black and gray tips and tricks while I'm working on this Jaws tattoo piece. So I'm going in, I'm just starting with my 13 curved mag, regular needle size, not bug pinned. And my gray lines are already healed from the last session, so I already have my stencil in place. And I'm just going through and I'm starting to add some shading to the corners here. I always like to use a bigger mag, moving my hand really fast in the beginning just to make sure that I don't go too dark too quickly, because I really like to get my first few layers done, and then towards the end I go in and start to darken things up in the corners and refine the values a little bit more. So in the beginning, it's just about getting the framework in there and getting values on the skin. And then from there, we can go and adjust. So you see, I'm moving my hand pretty quick because I don't want the ink to be too dark. I'm using like a medium gray wash. I always mix it myself in the ink caps when I'm making my, or putting my station together. So I'll typically use a full cap of black for my darkest, and then I'll use a half a cap of black, a quarter cap of black, an eighth, and so on. And I just mix that with witch hazel or distilled water to create my gray wash. And I do add a drop or two of white ink into my gray wash when I'm mixing it, because I find that gives me a creamier look to the finished product. And I also find that my blends are just a little bit smoother. Now, you do notice that I'm not the kind of tattooer who is super concerned about having perfect whip shading and super soft, super smooth blends, especially on a piece like this where we're doing a shark jaw. It's better to have a rough texture. I want to see that rough texture because it gives a personality to the overall piece that we wouldn't get in the same way if it was super smooth like an airbrush. So now I'm using my 5 mag, just a 5 mag flat, like not curved, and just going in, using it in the corners to add a little bit more detail to some areas, and again, start to build up my values. When I'm doing black and gray, it's all about building up the values. I don't want to go too dark too quick, because you can't pull back on that. If you go too dark, you can't lighten it up. So it's nice to be able to just do things layer by layer. And as long as you're not tearing up the skin or having any skin damage doing this, it works fantastic. Worst case scenario, if you put down your first layer and then you realize that the skin is just not doing that well, if it's super swollen, super red, super irritated, then it's better to just let it heal and come back to it the next time. I think that sometimes it sucks for clients when they have to wait to get something finished that they wanted to get done that session, but overall it's better to do a really quality artwork than it is to just get something done for the sake of getting it done. So I'm going back in with my 13 mag curved mag right now, and I'm just adding again some of my medium gray wash where I need to push those shadows into the background. It looks like my hand's moving really fast, but this is actually real time. This is not sped up. And I just move my hand fast and run my machine relatively high because it allows me to cover a lot of ground, and I just naturally move my hand fast. So having a machine that's putting a lot of ink in really quickly is complementary to having a fast hand speed, because you can kind of balance things out. And then if I want an area to be darker, I'll just slow my hand speed down and hang out in that area for a little bit longer. Even there, you can just see I'm going back into the corners and darkening things up a little bit. And once we're done this first layer of the medium gray wash, I'll go back in with my black and then darken things up. And then after that, again, I'll probably go in with my lightest gray wash and just do a flat wash over everything except for my brightest highlight areas. I really love doing black and gray for skulls, for things that are organic like this, because you can just create such fun texture with it. It's really fun, and I really enjoyed working on this piece with my client. Still just going in using my 13 mag and turning it on an angle so that I can use that tip as I need to get into smaller spaces. Don't get caught up thinking that you need to use really small needles to create really small details, because it's not the case. You can really create pretty much almost everything you need to with a 13 or 17 or even a 27 mag. You'll notice here that I'm not running my tube off the skin, and the reason I do this is because I'm trying to be more precise with the areas that I'm putting ink in, because I really don't want to overshoot my line and end up shading a spot that I don't want to be shaded. So I hover my tube off the skin a little bit, and that gives me a little bit more precision. And then when I'm going over a bigger area like you see now, I can really run my tube right on the skin, because I don't have to be quite as precise in spots like this. And the great thing about using a mag is you have one side that's really wide, so you can do big areas like this. And then if you need to turn it on an angle to get a small line or do some finer details, you can do that. So you have really two ways you can go about it when you're using big mags. And that's why I like using big mags so much as opposed to smaller needles. It's also a lot easier to see when you're working on the skin. If I'm using a small needle, I have to be like inches away to see what I'm doing. But if I'm using a big mag, I can relax my shoulders, relax my neck and my jaw, and just do it from a distance, and it works great. So now I'm going in with an even lighter gray wash, and I'm using a bigger needle. I think that we're using a 23 curved mag right now. And I'm just going over top of almost everything just to add another value layer to it, because I don't want a whole lot of highlight areas on this piece. I think that black and gray looks really good if you almost go over the top and make it look like it's a little bit too dark. You have to remember that black and gray typically heals a lot lighter than it goes in the skin. So if you can learn to overshade something confidently and then just let it heal up to its natural values, then it's gonna balance each other out in that sense. So now I'm going in with my smaller mag again, my 13, and I'm using a darker gray wash. This might even be black actually. And I'm just going in the corners. And then as I wipe away, you can see how much darker that is as opposed to when I started. So black and gray, it's all about pushing your shadow areas back in order to make the light areas look like they're moving forwards towards us. So we're creating that illusion of perspective by using this pushing and pulling effect. And we do that by using dark areas to push the viewer away, and then the light areas naturally come forwards from that. So still just going in with the 13 mag and darkening things up, darkening the corners where I feel like I need to, adding a little bit more of that bony structured texture to the design. And just slowly building things up. Black and gray is all about building things up. You don't want to go too dark too quick, because again, you can't undo that. And it's just so much more relaxing if you can learn to move through these different levels with confidence, as opposed to freaking out and going in and trying to go too dark too quickly, or just putting in all your values all at once. So this is a great example of where you can see I just tilt the side of my mag as I need to when I'm trying to get into a tighter area. And again, I already have my lighter values down on this area, so I'm going back in with a darker gray wash or a black, and I'm just adding that to the corners and slowly moving my way out so that I can really push and pull the values in this piece to create depth, because that's what creates your depth. Same thing up here, just going in with a darker pigment, just straight black in this case, and I'm adding it to the corners to darken things up to help push my shadows into the background. And you can see how much darker it is after I put this pigment down, and in a sec here I'm going to wipe away and you're going to see what it does for the design. So look how much darker it is in those areas. Again, just tilting my needle sideways when I need to get into those smaller spaces, like in between the teeth. And I'm just using my lighter gray wash again for my first layer. And then as I need to afterwards, I'm going to go and put my darks down. So you're starting to hear the repetition in this video where it's all about putting down layers, building things up, going slowly, using your needles on an angle. Alright, so all of the big areas of gray wash are done. Now I'm going in with a liner just to create a little bit of a textured detail before we finish up this piece. And I'm also using my liner just in between some of the really small areas in between the teeth to really darken some very select spots. And I typically try to use a liner very conservatively when I'm doing this, because I do find it's a lot easier to tear the skin when you're going back over something with a liner. But in this case, the skin was fine, and I just really wanted to be super precise putting down my darkest values at this final stage. So that's why I avoided using a mag right now. Now finally, we're going in using a 5-round shader or an 8-round shader usually for the white highlights. And I'm just putting some of these highlights in where I want the texture to really pop and to really show through on the final product. And anytime you're using white highlights, I think it's really important to use them sparingly. A good rule of thumb would be if your tattoo does not look good before you put the white highlights in, then the highlights are not going to save it. So do not rely on white at any point in time to make or break your design, because that's not a good way to look at things. I'm just using it here on some of the bone ridges where I really want it to look like it has this bony sort of rigid, or like, I don't know how to describe it, bumpy textured feel to it. Like I've never, I don't know, a bone texture, that's what we're trying to make here. And you can see that we're building up the texture in a way where you look at it and you can almost feel it. You're feeling it with your eyes. Like you can imagine what it's like to have this piece of bone in your hand and feeling all those textures between your fingers. That's what we're doing. We're just creating the illusion of a three-dimensional shape on the skin. And black and gray is such an incredible way to do this because it's so simple. Black and gray is so much more straightforward than it is to do color, and especially color realism. So you can really get into the depth with all of these little tricks and textures and bumps and lumps and shapes and kind of stuff when you're creating a black and gray tattoo. It really is like a sculpture where you're just slowly working away to refine the shape over and over and over, and every time you go over it again, the shape comes together a little bit more fully. Anyways, that's all I've got for you today. If you want to know more about this process, or if you have any questions about black and gray tattooing, leave a comment down below. Just tell me what you think about this video. I really want to hear from you, and it's awesome to help me grow my channel. All right, so I love you, and I'll see you next time.